If you want to follow along in your Bibles, we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into it. We're looking at the David and Goliath narrative, and last week we did the bigger overview of the context, and now we're going to dig into one of the conversations that was going on, David's walk. And then next week we'll finish up the series by expanding back out to the greater context and looking at some key points that we can bring out into it. But I really want to narrow down into a specific area because I really felt like the Lord was speaking to myself with the things that He could speak to me onto it, and then hopefully it'll correspond to you as well. So 1 Samuel chapter 17, and we're going to start off and actually not go very much further than this, the 28th verse. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at Eliab's conversation that he's having with David. When David goes to give the provisions to his brothers, and he gets there and he overhears what Goliath is doing of mocking the children of Israel. David's like, how could he be doing that? And he starts asking questions. They talk about the reward that's going to come, and David's kind of gleaning more information like, hey, what's going to happen to the person that defeats this Philistine? And his brother Eliab gets upset at David, and that's the context that we're going to look at today. So 1 Samuel 17, starting in verse 28. So now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumptions and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. What we're going to look at here is not so much David's response to this, but what I really felt the Lord asking me when reading this passage is going, am I ever an Eliab? Do I ever respond to people the way that he does to David? Because we've seen in the greater context that this was to try to destroy David from wanting to do the thing that God had called him to do. And I don't know about you, I don't ever want to get into that position where I am doing that. And so I see Eliab's conversation with David as a criticism of maybe somebody who's frustrated. I don't know what the internal thing was of Eliab, but there's something about him that his counsel was not to double-check David or to build him up. His counsel was completely just to tear him down. And I want to take some time to look at it and us look at ourselves. And this isn't a message to be thinking about, oh, somebody else needs to hear this, but really to ask ourselves, when do we do this? And how do we prevent ourselves from doing this kind of language ourselves? So what we can see with what Eliab says to David is there's three criteria that jumped out at me of what he is communicating with David. And the first question that he has is the why. Why have you come down here? And that's the attack that's kind of who do you think you are to do whatever it is that we have in a conversation. This could be in the terms of relationship. Maybe we're having an argument in a relationship. It could be an idea that somebody presents at our work or at a brainstorming seminar or something like that. And we hear a response and we start communicating with them. We got to watch of, do we start questioning, like, who do you even think you are on even asking this question to begin with? That's where Eliab starts. But he goes on from there, building on it, and he goes into just an assumption then when he says, with whom have you left those few sheep? Eliab just jumps to the conclusion that David must not have been taking care of his original responsibilities. He has no reason to be stating that. He just assumes the worst out of David, that he has flawed in some manner. Now we know the greater context that David left the sheep in the hands of a good person to tend and watch over them, but Eliab goes automatically to the negative. The third thing that Eliab does is he makes a judgment claim on David by telling, I know the presumptions of your heart and that it's evil. You just came down here to see the battle. Now again, we have the greater context. We see that David was coming to bring them provisions and he was coming to check on their well-being. But he automatically, his brother assumes judgment onto him of, I know already what you were trying to do, and it's a bad thing. And so what we're going to look at ourselves is go, how do we sometimes do this as well, and what can we do to prevent ourselves from making these same kind of attacks? Because Eliab was being used by the enemy to try to convince David not to go and do the task that God had laid before him. And that's the last place, I don't know about you, that I ever want to be in, where I'm giving criticism to somebody in such a harsh manner. Next week, we can look at ways that we can give good criticism to people to build them up, but this is going to be geared towards this language that is the assumptions and the judgments that we have when it comes to communicating with people. I love what Peter Barton Stark says. Those that have attended the Wednesday studies, you would have heard this quote by him. Starks is a man who helps leadership teams within organizations and in churches to help train them. And he has this to say about our words and our communication. He says, when you open your mouth, are you getting one step closer to your goal? And he has a phenomenal story that goes along with this. But I thought that is such great advice. I mean, think about that. Whatever your goal is in your life, we need to really double check the words that are coming out of our mouths. Are they actually helping us to get to that goal? So we have a vision for this church of being rooted and built up in Christ and worship and reaching out to evangelize, disciple those who don't have a church home and those who haven't accepted Christ. But if I was up here and I was to say, I don't care if none of you come back next Sunday, does that get me one step closer to my goal? No. If nobody shows up, then I'm not going to reach that goal. We're not going to be built up. We're not going to be rooted into our faith. But out of frustration or something like that, I could spit out words that actually are going to be a hindrance towards my goal. And that's what Peter Stark is saying here. If we want to make sure the words that come out of our mouth get us one step closer. Because we get to the point where we're in frustration and we just start talking out of that, especially in relationships, because we get upset and we say things of, I don't even care if you don't come back. Is that really our goal? No, probably the reason we're lashing out is because we feel hurt and we feel unloved, so we want compassion from that individual and love us. But what did our one word do? It shoved them away, of saying, I'd rather have you not even come again. So we've got to be very careful with the words that come out of our mouth. Now, I don't mean to undercut Peter Starks, but he's not the phenomenal idea here of saying this, because it really comes from an application of what we would get from Scripture. He just has a unique way of saying it. We can find this in 2 Timothy 2:14 through 16. Remind them of these things and charge them before God not to quarrel about words which does no good, but only ruins the hearers. Do your best to present yourselves to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. But avoid irrelevant babble, for it will lead people into more and more ungodliness. All right, does the words that come out of our mouth get us one closer to our goal? We don't want to make people be wastebaskets for our words, where we're just throwing stuff out at them and the purpose is for them just to junk them. That's not how life actually works. They're going to take and internalize those words that come out. And so even God is saying through Paul, saying, don't get involved in irrelevant babble, meaning words that have no value to them whatsoever. Your point of saying these things aren't to get resolution. It's just to feed out fury or whatever is on our heart. And he says, don't get involved in these things, because they're going to cause quarrels and fighting that in the long run aren't going to do any good for anybody. So, when we look at this, we have the two ideas of the assumptions and the judgments that Eliab had when he was communicating with his brother David. And the problem is with assumptions and judgments is that we are preoccupying ourselves with moral concepts and things that we don't actually have firsthand knowledge of. So we're sitting there and we're trying to figure out the difference of who's the good person here and who's the bad person here. Or we're trying to figure out who's the normal one and who's doing things that are really abnormal in the situation. Or we're looking at is who's the one that's being responsible and doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, and who's the person that's being irresponsible in what they have to do or they're doing. And we're trying to figure out who's the smart one that's using logic and connecting all the dots, and who's the one that's being ignorant and just working off of opinions or being arbitrary or something like that. See, we preoccupy ourselves with all these judgments and the assumptions that we have no idea all the greater context with, instead of actually working at the task at hand. And that is the first and foremost issue that we have when we go into assumptions and judgments. So really, what are our assumptions then? Assumptions are usually based off of expectations. And expectations are not facts, and we have to get that in our minds. We can go two different ways with expectations. We can expect something of a goal for somebody to reach, and then when they don't reach that, we become very mad at them. It's not their fault. because we're the ones that put that goal there. And maybe they even agreed with it. But it wasn't a guarantee they were going to hit that goal. But we put them up on this pedestal of they are going to reach this. They don't, and then we become frustrated because they didn't get as high as what we wanted to. Or we can do the reverse of that, and we can expect them to fail. And so when we go in and we watch for ways that they are going to end up failing us. If I'm going to go to a get-together with family members, and I know Susie, I think when I go there, she's not going to like me, and so I go to that party, and I notice she never comes over and talks to me, and there's at one point, I think she had a scowl on her face when she looked in my direction. So I walk away and go, Susie, I knew she was going to do that. She was mad at me. So I put a thing in my mind, and I looked for it, and I found every little hint of her meeting my expectation of it. I dealt with this a lot when I worked with trustees from the jail. We would go into the stores to have to purchase an item, and they would have to wear their orange and white stripes in there. And some of them would be very conscious of that. And they would walk out and they'd be like, man, everybody was staring at me. But they went in with that expectation of, I stick out, people are going to think different of me. And me being the third party, like, no, nobody was really paying attention to you. All right, but we have these expectations, and then we make people fulfill them. So it's important to remember with our assumptions, they're not based on reality. All right, and we have to be very careful of that. That's what Eliab did when he says, where did you leave those sheep alone in the wilderness? He was assuming that David had done some kind of a flaw. It wasn't reality. He didn't listen and ask first, hey, how's the sheep going? Who's watching over them? To get his details first, he just automatically jumps to an expectation that he has that David would have failed. So we need to remember reality is something that is attached to something that's concrete in time and has a context connected with it. All right? If I would say, at the meeting, Susie didn't listen to my opinion, that might be something in a specific time in a meeting, and I'm stating that Susie didn't listen to my opinion. Maybe she interrupted me, maybe she just went on. That would be just a reality of it. I'm just stating facts, but not having an assumption or a moral judgment to it. The way that we fall into assumptions or judgments is if I say something like, Susie had that idea for no reason. Wait, I'm just assuming something there. I'm assuming she has no reason for what she has to say. See how that's an assumption that I'm making there versus a reality of something that actually happened? Or I could say something as, Joe works too much. Well, that's a judgment claim. Who am I to say what is too much work? So how could I word that better? Joe works 60 hours a week. All right, so that's just a fact that I'm stating. I'm not putting a moral judgment upon that. Or it could say, Joe is too aggressive. Or the Red Wings played too aggressive in their hockey game the other day. Again, that's a judgment call of what is too aggressive. I could say, the Red Wings had 37 checks in the game. Okay, that kind of gets the point across, maybe what I'm thinking of too aggressive, but I'm not stating a moral judgment onto that. So hopefully we get the idea of what happens with our assumptions and when we're putting this information in. So let's look at it a little bit, let's go a little bit further. So the other issue that we have, and I see this from my standpoint because I'm I just lost the term. A person that can't remember words, I guess is what I am. A person that takes words seriously. There we go. Fill in the blank of what that title is. We have to be very careful in our language and any kind of communication of hyperbolic language where we exaggerate for emphasis. Because what that does is to the person that takes words very literally is they hold on to those, and that's going to infuriate them or make them go in the wrong direction. So common hyperbolic language would be, you always do this, or you never do that. All right, the person that is clashing on those words, like, hey, there's a time that I didn't do that, and so how could you possibly say that I always do that? Okay, so we have to be very careful of that language. Again, those are judgment calls, and those are exaggerations, and we have to be very careful when we use those, because if that person is going to hold on to every word that you have to say, they're going to blow you off on going, you don't know what you're talking about because you're exaggerating. Okay, so we have to be very careful of that kind of language. It's great in poetry, it's great in general conversation, not great in a debate or an argument or sharing ideas at a team meeting or something like that. So really what we can say about assumptions is it shows the heart of the person that's making the assumption. It says nothing about the other individual that we're assuming about. Eliab saying, David, who did you leave those sheep with? Tells us nothing about David, but it tells us a lot about where Eliab's heart was at. He didn't trust David. It was bitter, it was frustrated, whatever it would be. So it tells us more about ourselves when we find ourselves using assumptions or judgments. And that's when we need to start praying for our own hearts, going, wait a minute, Lord, I'm making judgment calls or assumptions of what this person's doing. So really, we could summarize it by saying, I'm sorry, got one more. It's a lack of awareness. It's telling us that we haven't listened well enough to what they have to say. We're speaking first, or we're not paying attention to the greater context of what's going on around us, or why they might be saying or doing the things that they are doing. Now what I was thinking, we could sum it up by saying we're really being self-centered. It's all about ourselves when we make assumptions or judgment calls. We want everything to be related upon how we see information, not how other people might see it or how God's standard would be. The Red Wings were too aggressive with 37 checks because I determined that is the number that makes them too aggressive. See where it becomes self-centered and it's all about me because I'm the one that's able to claim what is happening here. Eliab is being self-centered by saying, David, you've done the wrong thing with the sheep. I don't even have to know the details. I'm just declaring that you have done something wrong with the sheep. So that is why it is self-centered. So let's take a look now at the judgments aspect. Judgments are accusations that we make against other people. I want you to see the core concept. Let's take the core concept of saying somebody needing more attention. Okay, that is going to be the core issue here. But say that Carrie, my wife, needs more attention than I want to give her. I could declare her as being needy. But let's flip it around and say, still the core concept, if I'm desiring more attention than what Carrie, my wife, is giving me, so I'm wanting the attention, now I can declare that she's being insensitive. You notice the concept is the exact same, but the judgments are two total opposites. That's why judgments don't work, and they're just accusations. And that's why we can't use them. It depends who the party is that's the one that's making the judgment of what that declaration is going to be. Is more attention needy, or is more attention insensitive on the other part for not giving it? All right, so we have to be very careful with judgment claims that we would make. So judgment claims are really criticisms. So when we use judgment language like Eliab does, of who did you leave those with the sheep, or more importantly, I know your heart and it's evil, and you came here just to see the bloodbath of the battle, well, that's a criticism. And what that does is it gets the other party that's listening to you to shut down. Because, wow, you're just attacking me. And what's probably the number one response we have when we feel attacked? We want to defend ourselves. The problem is we defend ourselves usually with judgmental language back at them. And so then we just created this vicious cycle where we're all beating each other up. When in the whole time we want to actually find a resolution. I think of it in the mind, it's like one party wants to get a hug, and so they stab the other person with a knife, and thinking that they're going to get a hug out of that, and so the other person stabs them back, but they want a hug back from them, and really we're beating each other up, but the whole time we're just wanting a hug, and so it's just going about it the total wrong way. I love how James 3:8 says this. It says, "But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison." Now think about that for a second. Getting bit by a poisonous snake. It hurts when you first get bit, I'm sure, by it. Luckily, I've never experienced that. It's a nightmare of mine, but yes. So you got that pain, but it's full of deadly poison. The problem is it's not just the initial bite that hurts, but it's continually doing damage. And that's what our judgment words do as well. We have the initial blow when we throw the judgment claim upon an individual. I know the evil of your heart. But the problem is it's not just that bite there. It's as they go home and away from you, and that keeps going over and over and over again in their minds. It's that deadly poison that keeps slowly tearing them apart. And that's why we have to be so careful with our assumptions and our judgments that we lash out. Because they're not wastebasket for our words. They're going to resonate with those people, and it's slowly going to tear them apart. We're going to maybe in a day, 2, if you're a woman, maybe 12 months later, you're going to forgive that individual. Sorry, no, I'm just joking. You laughed. I was afraid I was going to get in trouble there. We're going to forgive those people, but they're still going to be dealing with those words that we had to say, and that's what is so hard with judgment claims. All right, so I want to transition just for a second because I don't want us to stop here because we can actually take judgments and assumptions a step further than just with our words that we have communicating with people. We can actually do them with our supposable feelings as well. Now, I'm not standing up here being like some people and saying, we need to express our feelings. Don't go there, okay? That's not what I'm saying. Not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm not saying that people don't want to express their feelings. They have to, okay? That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying we need to know our own feelings before we are able to fully understand where we're at as an individual. Because if you start with the wrong feeling, you're actually not going to solve the issue that you're having. All right? I think of it as at work when I had the herniated disc and it put pressure on my sciatic nerve and I had a lot of pain down my right leg. I could have iced or put a heating pad on my leg all I wanted to. It would have never done any good because that wasn't the source of the issue. The source was the pinched nerve, and so I had to do the physical therapy to get the relief off of that nerve. It's the same with our feelings. If we go off of what we sometimes classify as our feeling that really isn't a feeling at all, we aren't able to make any progress because we're looking into the wrong area. And really, these things that we supposedly call feelings a lot of times are assumptions and accusations against somebody else. And so that's why we have no power over them. True feelings are controlled by ourselves. People can influence our feelings, be an influence upon them, but they don't create them. And once we realize what our true feeling is, then we can make steps forward to make progress in whatever it is that we're battling. And we'll go over that to be able to get a better idea. But true feelings are not about something that we think about ourselves, and it's not something that we interpret about others. I really probably should have made a slide for this because this is key for what a feeling is. It's not what we think about ourselves, and it's not how we interpret somebody else's actions. All right? But we sometimes think of them as. It's also important to know that if you have to use the word I feel before the statement, it's probably actually not a feeling. So if I say, I feel that Susie should know better, that's really not a feeling. That's just a judgment that I'm having to say, okay? It's not an eternal feeling that we would have. So let's go through a couple of these ideas to get an idea what this is. I could say I feel inadequate. All right, say I'm in the tribe of Israel, and we're fighting the Philistines. Goliath steps out, and I'm like, I feel inadequate to be able to fight Goliath. No, I really can't feel inadequate. Okay, that's something I think about myself. I think I'm inadequate to be able to do that. So in order to really understand the concept, be like, what am I truly feeling? Well, there could be a bazillion feelings that we could fill in the blank for. I'm just going to choose one for an example for time. But maybe I'm feeling nervous because Goliath has so much armor and protection on him, and he is so big and muscular. I am nervous that I'm going to get destroyed if I come next to Goliath. Well, you know what? I can do something about feeling nervous. If I feel inadequate, there's not a whole lot I can do about that. I can try to practice and train to become better, but every time I fail, I'm going to feel inadequate. All right? And it's a thought process. The only way I can get over being inadequate is realizing it's what I think about myself and proving to myself I'm not inadequate. A feeling, though, if I realize, no, I feel nervous about it, and I'm not saying this is what David did, okay? I'm just using him as an example. Maybe David would say, okay, I feel nervous going up against Goliath, so what's causing me to feel nervous? Well, he has a lot of protection. So in order to go against Goliath, I'd have to find something that I could hit him with that would take him down that he has no protection in. All right? And I feel nervous because he has so much muscle and power, and he has that 15-pound spearhead in his arm and that coat of mail that's 125 pounds. Wait a minute, those are all close-quarter combat units. So in order for me not